Hi, everybody, and welcome to our tips for de-escalating COVID-related conflict at work. Before we get into the presentation with Amanda, I just want to say thank you to our Support Local and Action sponsors. That includes the City of New Westminster Record, the Port of Vancouver, as well as our supporting sponsors, Lauren Nanka, Chartered Accountants, Waddington Wealth Management, and also the Chambers Group Insurance Plan. So thank you to them. They're the reason why we're able to offer these events for free. Over to Amanda. So the impetus for this event, my name's Arnold Smith. I'm the CEO of the Chamber. And the impetus for this event is with the implementation of mandatory mask requirements and just COVID in general, many people are finding increased conflict. And so we really wanted to give people some tools about what they can do, not only in the workplace, but also in home or in other areas of their life. And specifically, just really if they're in a work environment, how do they address when conflict comes up? Amanda, I don't have your bio in front of me. Do you want to introduce yourself, or I should? I was in the anyway. So Amanda is a professional mediator with Mediate BC. She also owns her own company,
Mindful Resolution.
So conflict resolution expert, local here in New Westminster, and she's fantastic. And Amanda, do you want to say anything else specific to what you've been up to recently?
Yeah, so in March, I joined Mediate BC to run their COVID response program. And so I've been doing a lot of work around conflict with COVID. And that's part of why Arnold invited me here today. And so as we go through things, you'll learn a little bit more about me. And I'm just going to say a couple of quick things about how I'm hoping this works today. So it's being recorded. If for any reason you really have a question that you want asked, but you're not comfortable speaking it yourself, type it in the chat. Arnold will be checking that for me, especially if I'm screen sharing, I can't see the chat. I am not a big fan of screen share because it means that I can't see who's in the room with us. And so we'll go back and forth between screen share and not screen share so I can see at least Arnold's reactions to things that I'm saying. It's sometimes hard to be talking straight into the void. And there's lots of people doing really good work in this area. And so a lot of it is just like finding places to get more ideas about what we're doing. And I'm joining today from Saperton. And I always like to kind of start everything with a bit of a land acknowledgement. I'm on the traditional territory of the Kakite First Nation and the Coast Salish people, and I'm just really grateful and honored to be able to do the work that I do in this place. This is a very, very special part of the world, and New West is a very special city, and yeah, it's just one of those kind of really, really key to my kind of heart spaces. Even though I've lived many places, this is one of my favorites. And so let's just take a pause and reflect on where we're at today. And then pauses on Zoom always seem a million times longer than they actually are. So, and so if I see somebody trying to unmute or raising a hand, we'll have that awkward Zoom pause that tends to occur as we kind of wait for things. And that's really okay. The technology is what it's going to be. And Arnold, any kind of last stuff to say before I launch in?
No, that's great. I want to acknowledge you for that excellent land acknowledgement. I really appreciate that. And that's actually a really great way to phrase it. Just the idea that this is a special place and we're honored to share it. I think that was great. So thank you for doing that.
Okay, so conflict resolution in the workplace and in business right now. I'm going to start with some screen sharing. So I think one of the places that I want to start is just some context of the moment. I think it's really important for us to think about kind of where we are when we're coming to conflict resolution and the things that are going on right now. And so one piece is COVID, but COVID isn't just the illness it is in many ways are very different experiences of how this has impacted us. So whether it's made people we know and care about sick, whether we're feeling very isolated, how we're interacting with stress, what our family life looks like and what our work life looks like can be very, very different. And so we're all coming into any of these interactions that we're having from very, very different places. And that really matters for how things start. When you're coming into the workplace, you're carrying all of the cares for everybody in risk in your life. So what your family dynamic looks like, whether you have kids in school, whether that school has had outbreaks or not had outbreaks, whether you have parents in long-term care, whether you have beloved family members that are high risk, whatever your family, whatever your workplace makeup look like will really, really change how you feel about COVID, how it's impacted you. For some of us, our work hasn't changed at all. It's basically exactly the way it was before. For others, our work is incredibly busy and incredibly stressful. And for others, our work doesn't exist. And so we have this huge band of what work is like. And often in our work, the rules are constantly changing. The expectations are constantly changing. The public's understanding of what should be happening, what good enough is also constantly shifting. And I want to say that this matters too. So a lot of the kind of surgence in racial justice movements that we've seen through the last year, a lot of these discussions that for communities of color are not new. A lot of groups that are marginalized by society are being much more significantly impacted, not only by COVID itself, but by the restrictions that are in place. And for a whole number of reasons, whether that was anti-Asian racism that we saw kind of in like February, March, April, whether that's housing conditions, whether that's poverty, racism, whatever those pieces are, we are also carrying all of this into this space where these conversations are feeling difficult. And I'm going to just add a little bit of context of what I'm seeing. So I run something that's called the Quarantine Conflict Resolution Service. I talk with many people in conflict every day. And what we're seeing is increases in conflict across all areas of life. So whether that's in homes, within families, and within workplaces. There's a number of different programs across BC that deal with conflict and that deal with violence. And they're pretty consistently saying they're getting about 3 times their normal call volume for conflict-related issues, whether that's the Residential Tenancy Board, whether that's like Women's Shelter and Violence Resources, pro bono access for family resolution. Each of those different services are saying that their calls are up about 3 times. And we're seeing that play out in our numbers as well. We're also finding that difficult conversations are more difficult. And so I'm hearing this both from people that do like workplace conflict and investigations. I'm hearing it from people that do family conflict. I'm finding it in my own conflict resolution work that people are just having a lot more difficulty kind of holding the sorts of spaces required to have difficult conversations. And then the other piece that's important to note here is that people are experiencing decision fatigue. So this is something where, you know, we have a lot of really important choices to make every day about how we're going to show up, and we're tired. There's a lot of confusion and gray space in the different rules, suggestions. The difference between guidance and orders is a big deal right now for a lot of different people. And with all of these things, we're having increased reactivity, whether that's from stress or from lack of sleep, or from ways diets have gone strange for some of us, or lack of physical activity or changes. For all of these reasons, things are a little bit more difficult. And one of the first things that Arnold kind of called me to really talk about are masks. And so there's 2 pieces of context here that I think are really important. The first is that masks are more than masks. And so because we are not interacting in person as much, masks have carried a lot of symbols, and they've been carrying those for a while. So before the mask mandate, there was a dialogue around how you wear a mask because you care. They're a bit of compassion signaling. And while in Canada it has not been as extreme as it has been in the States, we kind of get a media splashback effect from whatever happens in the US. And so there is a group identification piece that goes with masking that I think is really important. So for some people, not masking is part of their group identity and part of their kind of political identity. And that makes this conversation much more fraught. That anti-mask group is actually really, really small. Unfortunately, the unable to mask group is much, much bigger. And so the unable to mask group, for whatever reason that they are unable to mask, are feeling the backlash of being associated with anti-maskers. And so we have this space where if you're unable to mask, you often feel unwelcome. There's an assumption that you're an anti-masker. If you're sort of asked to prove yourself. So there's this expectation of really personal disclosures about medical or other conditions in very public spaces to people you don't know for basic services. Whether that's like getting groceries or being able to do your banking, people are asking for a level of personal disclosure that's a little bit shocking sometimes. People can face harassment. In places where they are not welcome without a mask, they're feeling a loss of independence, greater restrictions than the rest of us, and even more social isolation than those of us that are able to wear masks because of that piece of being unwelcome. So I am going to stop my share and just be able to see faces for a moment and just check in and see, like, in that context, is there anything that kind of comes up or any questions that are front of mind?
When you were talking about that, I thought it was interesting, just the idea of really understanding that people are in a heightened state of tension already. Like what they're bringing to work, what they're bringing to the store that they might be going to, tends to be have that elevated, and it just occurred to me that that's something to really pay attention to, or to have that compassion. Because I know I feel like that that way too as well. I'm sometimes at the end of my rope just to start, and so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I find it fascinating with some of the aspects as well with like the masks. Is like, how do you deal with an individual that doesn't want to wear a mask in those aspects? It kind of gets sensitive. It's like, I guess it depends on like employment aspects too. If like, well, you need to wear a mask. Because I remember I was talking to a friend of mine, and she had a medical style business, and then it's like she required staff to wear masks, and some of them didn't. So she's like, "Well, I have to let you go because you're putting other people at risk." So it's like, and they're the ones paying. So it's like that line that you have to, I guess, play with. It kind of gets kind of delicate.
Yeah, and there's some tension in there. So not wanting to wear a mask at work, there's a second level of question that we kind of want to get to, right? So it's that space of why don't they want to wear a mask at work? Like, what is the thing? And sometimes you can solve whatever that piece is, right? Some people really don't like having stuff on their face. Okay, can we talk about a face shield? Can we talk about plexiglass? What are our options, especially for long periods of time, right? My mask gets very damp and my glasses fog up. I have yet to find a way without actually, I tape the top of my mask sometimes and my glasses fog up less, but I've yet to find a way to be able to see and mask effectively for any significant period of time, right? It's like, this is a problem. Luckily, I don't have to wear masks for significant periods of time. I've found some workarounds, but this kind of dialogue where you're like, it's not a yes or no, it's a how, right? You know, if we need people to be wearing masks with clients, right? If we need them to be doing this thing in this space, Like, how can we support them to do that? If they can't, and we can't have them work for us, we now have this disconnect, right? This sort of thing that needs solving. And there's always a solution. Sometimes there's no good answers. And so, you know, that's the other space of being like here in this conflict at this, or in this context, in this time, is often we're dealing with like 3 or 4 bad options, right? Like we have 3 or 4 and they're all awful. And people are saying, I don't want any of them. Okay, right? And there's a piece where acknowledgement there really matters. So like, yeah, this sucks. It does. And what are we going to do about it, right? What can you in your space handle so that we can get to here? Because our goal is patient safety and patient comfort, or our goal is client safety, client comfort, right? We don't want to be the place that's had the outbreak. To stay open, we're required to do this set of things. How do we get here? And so that conversation with staff is really, really key. You know, can you make accommodations? Do you have staff that can't wear masks? There are people that cannot wear masks, right? And they might have before been your best salespeople, right? The people that you had on the floor dealing with customers because they're lovely, people like to talk to them and they can sell anything. And now they can't be that person. And so for a lot of us, I mean, I work in a space where facial expression matters a lot. And if I am wearing a mask, nobody can see what my face is doing in the same way. And so it changes how we get to interact and what that looks like. And a lot of us are missing some of those skills. So if my smile is the reason that people tend to say yes to me, and now no one can see my smile, I have lost pieces of my job identity that are core to how I do my work. And so instinctively, I want to say no mask because I don't necessarily know how to do my work without people being able to see this piece of my face. And I might not even be totally aware of that. And so being able to go that layer down, give people the time and the space to have the conversation with you about why this piece matters is really important. And we're seeing that for all workplace kind of safety planning. And the whole space of how do we do this whole breadth of keeping people in the workplace safe and make them feel like they have as much power as possible. Out of the trauma-informed literature comes this kind of phrase, and I'm seeing Ebby, which just warms my heart so much. Jen's dog is one of the lovely Saberton neighborhood dogs, in case anybody was unaware. So out of the trauma-informed practice literature comes this little mantra of voice, choice, and control. So when anybody is not really okay, if you can give them voice, if you can give them choice, and if you can give them control over any aspect of what you're asking them to do, that piece of empowerment really helps them in that moment kind of come into a space of being able to engage effectively. So voice, choice, control. Ask them how they're doing, let them have options. that is so much more powerful than we think it is. And so that little mantra, voice, choice, control, can really help us dealing at work with people who, I mean, the rules change all the time. They're hard to keep track of. Most of them are uncomfortable. For some of us, it really, really, really matters because we have people at home or ourselves that our risks for COVID feel much bigger than maybe the average person's risk for COVID. And so our safety concerns are really, really high right now. And so for that person in your workplace, they're going to feel like you're not doing enough. Like the workplace isn't safe enough. And for the 22-year-old that lives at home, where workplace is their social outing, we're doing way too much, and this is so much, right? And they're being as safe as they can, and it seems layered and it seems extra, and because they don't have the same level of personal risk or the same risk assessment, they come to it from a very different place. And that place is okay, right? It's often really hard to understand somebody's risks if you don't have them yourself. Any other kind of questions or thoughts right now?
Potentially, I wondered if Jen had when she put her video on, I wonder if she had a comment. Did you have something that you wanted to ask, Jen, or no? Okay. Something you said made me, I thought about an article that I read recently about toxic positivity and the idea of kind of of brushing aside the reality that people might be in, and can you, I don't know if that was part of your conversation, but can you kind of talk about that? Because I think some people might be experiencing.
So toxic positivity is that, like, you know, positive mindset, no matter what, space, which can invalidate people's real true feelings and people's experience. And so if I come to work and I say something like, I'm really nervous, this doesn't feel safe, and your reaction is, it'll be fine, don't worry, what you're telling me is that my feeling of unsafe is unvalid, it's wrong, and it doesn't matter, right? And so this space of being able to be like, okay, so it's important that we have a safe and positive workplace. I feel like it's safe and positive. What feels unsafe to you? You can still have your own, I feel safe and positive in this workplace, without necessarily invalidating the other person's experience, right? And at the same time, that shift to question kind of gets us out of the sort of griping mode and into problem solving, into that ability to connect in a way that's really leading us towards being able to do something. I mean, most people in business are people that would really like to do something, especially small business, where we tend to be doers, right? We like to show up and get on with whatever it is that needs doing. Sometimes it leads us to kind of miss some of the first empathy pieces. So I'll pull back up my slides for a moment and talk through a little bit of a framework for how I think about conflict resolution right now. And I've been using Dr. Bonnie Henry's be calm, be kind, be safe mantra a little bit, because people are so aware of it, we can hold it a little bit. And it's easy for us to kind of remember short things like this, especially when we're seeing them over and over again. And it's an easy space for us to be able to kind of hold that when we're feeling a little like at the end of our rope, or a little crispy, as I like to say, you know, overthought, overworked. And so this concept of like, what does kindness look like in conflict, and what does it look like in communication? And when I'm thinking about kindness in conflict, the spaces I'm thinking about is like when we are like finding ourselves in conflict with somebody, whether they know it or not. So we're not necessarily at the point that we're yelling at one another, or that we kind of have this like largely escalated conflict, but more like, I need you to be different than you are right now, or you need me to be different than I am right now. There's something in this that isn't working, needs to change, and there's a bit of risk there in what that looks like. And so the tools for kindness in conflict, I mean, and the first big one is empathy. And so the first thing that I tend to ask people before they start engaging is to be like, what else could be going on here for this person? So I might be making a whole bunch of assumptions. The faster I move into interacting with them, the more likely I am to make some pretty nasty assumptions about somebody that's doing something that I need to be different, whether that is not wearing a mask as they walk into a retail location, or, I mean, perhaps it's like too close on the sidewalk, or, you know, the car cutting through the crosswalk while I'm crossing with my kids, the person that is standing too close and breathing at me, whatever that is. And so there is a question of what else could be going on here in this moment. And we tend to make assumptions about what would be going on for us if we were doing that thing in this moment. And if I was standing that close, it's because I'm a terrible human being, probably, right? But nobody gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to go out and I am going to be a total jerk. And so often there is something else happening in this moment. And so just giving the space to acknowledge that you don't necessarily know what's going on. And then this reflective listening piece of, you know, acknowledging what's going on for them, making sure you understand what's happening and focusing on commonalities. And so that can be slightly abstract, but if we take it to an example like somebody comes into your retail location and they have no mask on and they're walking straight in, and it's your job to be the person that stops them and asks them to put a mask on. That first piece of thinking, okay, what could be going on for this person? And really acknowledging that you don't know why they don't have a mask. That first ask of something that is relatively friendly, relatively brief, that is along the lines, depending on your business, of we require masks right now. Do you have one? Or did you forget your mask? Or if you don't have a mask, here is a mask. Whatever that piece is in your business location, whatever you've decided works for you, they will then tell you something, right? And that thing, if you're really listening for it, gives you your next step. And so that piece of like really waiting for them to respond, showing them that you're listening to them, being ready to hear them, and they'll come back with something. And it may be, I am not wearing a mask. And so you can restate that, you can acknowledge that, okay, so you are unable to wear a mask. And they will say yes or they will say no. And then you can use here's our safety plan. Okay, so if you're unable to wear a mask, we can't have you in the store today. Here's how else we can serve you. That piece of once you've really listened to them, and they'll probably react again and tell you something that you probably don't want to hear. And it's not about you, but that space of, if they get really angry, well, this is totally ridiculous. Yeah, and it's really frustrating, right? And that's because that's right where they are. And you can agree with them that it is totally ridiculous and really frustrating, because it is. This is where we're at right now. And you have these rules that you need followed. The second piece I think that's really important is this be calm. I like to add be friendly, but I think be calm is, we've heard it enough that I think it's really helpful for us to kind of use this. And the first piece of be calm is that, that deep breath before you go into a conversation that you are a little bit nervous about, or where you're highly elevated. So if my family is high risk and I need my retail job and I have you coming into the store with no mask, that can be super triggering. That can make me really, really angry, make me really unsafe. I can start thinking those things like, you people who don't wear masks are the reason that, right? It's really easy for our minds to go there. And so the moment you see yourself going there, you can't start this conversation with this person, right? You are the wrong person to be having this conversation while your mind is in that state. And so that first deep breath, that noticing that that's where you've gone is a really big deal. The second piece about calm is that calm down has never made anybody in the history of the world act calmer. This is not a thing that occurs. So that mirroring is a big deal, and then space is a big deal. And by making space, there's kind of three key components to space. One is physical space. So making sure that your physical body is not threatening for anyone. At the same time, it's not the same as meekness. And so I will pull off my slide share for a moment and really kind of talk through what space means in helping de-escalation. So you want to be close enough to someone that the conversation feels personal. At the same time, you want to be far enough away that you are not threatening. So if somebody is highly escalated, if they have a mindset where they're walking into a retail location and the morning has been ridiculous, really hard, things have not been well so far, maybe they're unable to mask, and maybe you are the 19th person asking them to put a mask on, right? And they're unable, and they are just so tired of having to tell people they can't do it, right? Whatever that piece for them is, if you come really close, you will trigger all kinds of threat responses, which is exactly what you don't want. If you stay really far away and you use a huge loud voice, they will feel called out in public and humiliated, right? And And if you follow coaching literature, Brene Brown, any of the people that talk about shame, one of the key things that you learn is that being humiliated, shamed, and embarrassed has never, ever it never creates any long-term behavior change, and generally causes people to entrench into whatever negative behavior you would really not like to have, right? And so this space of what is the quietest voice you can use with a firmness that allows you to get your point across. You want to have strong body language, but not threatening body language. And that sounds like a bit of a contradiction, but I'm turned towards somebody. I'm close enough that we can have a personal conversation, but I am still well back. So our 2 meters, right, you would never want to violate the 2 meters, and often 3 is more than enough right now. So taking that space, and if somebody feels really elevated, even taking a step back, but it's a strong step back. So you want to, it's not a retreat, it is I'm giving you space. And then openness of body language and of arms and things. So there's a huge difference between telling somebody they have to mask with closed body language and asking somebody or inviting them to mask with open body language. And what that really means is, because our faces are covered, it is, eyebrows up, eyes open, facing, arms or hands open if that's possible. And that really turning to look at someone. So, if in my neighborhood, the people at Costco for masking have probably been consistently doing the best job of anyone that I interact with on a semi-regular basis. Like, they've been doing a fabulous job. And part of it is they have a person that turns to you and hands you a mask and says, do you need one today? But there is really this kind of, and they've obviously been trained on shifting. They make eye contact, shoulders orient towards the person. They're not doing something else and handing out masks. There is a personalization of that interaction in which a person feels like they're seen and cared for. And when that is done well, it really shifts that dynamic. And so there's that body language piece of calm. There's a mirror neuron piece of calm, that if I'm calm, somebody else is more likely to be calm. If my tone is calm, they're more likely to respond with a calm tone. There are pieces where if somebody is really loud in their response, a louder response that then comes down is more likely to be able to draw their response down. You don't want to totally mismatch energy, because people can feel talked down to. It can trigger defensiveness. So somebody's really loud and really animated, you bring your energy up to meet them, and then you can calm yourself down. And sometimes that'll bring somebody right down with you, which is an amazing technique, works really, really well with kids. And most of us, when we're highly elevated, we revert to behaving like children. And so a lot of those techniques that, are really effective in dealing with kids are also really effective dealing with highly escalated adults, which is not to say the same as trying to be patronizing. So those things that don't work with your kids, like quit crying, right? Those pieces, they don't work with kids. They don't work with adults either, right? Those pieces that we've learned about kind of empathetic parenting are really effective with adults as well. And we all know, right? It's hard to listen. It's hard to hear. We're a little confused. For a significant segment of the population, the rate of change of recommendations, the rate of change of public acceptance of different ways of doing things, the fact that all of the rules are different everywhere is in and of itself triggering. And so being able to acknowledge that this is confusing, and if you need me to, I'll walk you through what our new protocols are, can really help somebody feel like they're welcome. So when I walk into a store and I don't know what to do or where to go, I can't find what I want anymore, I'm always going the wrong way down the aisle, and now somebody's telling me I'm doing something else wrong, can be really, really triggering, especially if you only intended to be out for a short period of time. Maybe you're shopping on a break from another job and you don't have time for this, or you left your dog at home and you're not sure what they're chewing, or whatever other kind of stress, maybe being out in the world because you can't wear a mask and you have a health condition is really stressful. Whatever those pieces are, the fact that it takes longer to go through everything in and of itself can be stressful. And so that extra moment of like, I'm really sorry, our rules have changed again. Would you like me to run you through them? Can be incredibly de-escalating for somebody. I care enough about you being a customer here that I will support you to figure out how to be in our store. If you can't wear a mask, here is what we have set up because we care about you. That feels very different than I need you to put your mask on, which also feels very different than why aren't you wearing a mask? And so these kind of spaces of how do we pull the language to something that acknowledges that here's a person that is likely trying to do their best at a very hard time. And if I look back at my slides, I'm trying to decide if I put them back up or if I just talk. So my next slide would say, be safe. And I think I'll just chat this way because nobody needs to look at a picture that says be safe on it. So
Amanda, I just wanted to jump in before you moved on to being safe. You talk about empathy, and I'm wondering if I'm wondering if there's like approaches in it being empathetic. I think you talked a lot about like how do you, but is there kind of a few phrases that you can tap into how people might be feeling in that moment? Like I guess that initial approach that would signal empathy. And I love what you talked about, like obviously, you know, facing towards them, giving them your attention and not making it. Is there a kind of just an initial phrase that would help people come across as empathetic?
So the piece about empathy is it is about this moment with this person. And if I give you the words, that is exactly the opposite of empathy in the moment.
Got it.
Right? Like this. So we can have phrases that we like to use that we kind of we build a stack of, and I'll share at the end. The City of New West has put together this lovely fact sheet that actually has some specific phrases you can use in it, and it is really well done. And so I will definitely share that. But if you're thinking about somebody, really empathy is about wanting to know what's going on for them and who they are in this moment right now. And so if you can have curiosity instead of judgment about the fact that they are not wearing a mask, and an ability to acknowledge that in this moment, this is who they are and where they're at, like that is kind of your building blocks of sort of functional empathy. So our goal is to be seen and be heard. Oh, Jen has put the link in the chat. Thank you, Jen.
She's quality. That Jen, she gets it done.
So that space of, you know, my words should meet who the person is at this moment. And so the language will change a little bit, and the language will change dramatically depending on where you are. So for my family that works in the oil patch where masks are currently required, if somebody walks in without wearing a mask, the empathetic and nice thing to do is to smile at them and say, hey, explicative, it's mask day, right? You would never do that at the grocery store to a grandmother, right? It would be so totally inappropriate. And yet in that place, that feels like a friendly reminder. And so so context really, really matters. It matters if your person that has come in is from a vulnerable population where, you know, they may not be able to afford a mask. They may not have the facilities to wash masks. So they might not have clean, reusable masks. And your business might not be financially in a space where it can be handing them out. Right? So that could be the reality of where you're at this moment. A lot of businesses are really tight in retail, really close to the line, having to drop how many people can be in. Lower shopping numbers means you just don't have the space to be giving things away. And so in your planning about how we handle this, can you provide masks is a key question you need to answer for your business. Mm. If you cannot provide masks, how can you serve people? And do the demographics of people you serve, are they able to do online ordering? Are they able to, and so there are populations that right now are really hard to serve. They cannot mask, they do not smartphone. They have gotten all the way to your location, and that trip was a big deal. And so them being able to engage in whatever transaction they've come for is really important to them. And so thinking through ahead of time how you do this, what your plan is for this piece, is really, really key. And if you have a plan, then you can do it. Your brain doesn't have to go to all of these panic places of how do I serve this person. And when we are all overwhelmed, if someone is hard to serve, we kind of feel like, oh, not this person again. So when you roll your eyes and you're thinking about how exhausting it is going to have to be for you to go through with this transaction. And that, again, is the opposite of empathy, right? And so this space where you can pull from your empathy for who this person is in this moment, right? This chance is that if they're not wearing a mask, they probably have a reason for it. And it may be that they are really exhausted and they just can't bring themselves to put one on. What are your options for them?
What you just said there really made me think as an organizational leader, whether it be with your staff who are front facing with customers, just to talk about like where they might be, like this person may have just gone through an incredibly, I'm leaving the house, I'm nervous, I'm scared, and I'm like this big deal to get there, or, you know, like I've got, you know, special needs or, you know, at-risk people at home. I thought that was a really great, I guess, kind of the pre-training for your staff or to kind of understand, kind of almost like setting a place to come for empathy. So I thought that was that's really great. Sorry, continue. I don't mean to keep interrupting.
It's good. The piece that's really important is when we are really stressed and when we don't have plans in place for what we could do, we tend to make those really, really awful decisions that land us in the news as discriminating against people, as being racist, as being whatever that label is of the moment. And it may not have been your intention, but when we are running on autopilot and stress, we use all of our stereotyping as shortcuts to survive. And so the more stressed you are in an interaction, the more likely you are to stereotype, and the more likely you are to stereotype negatively, the more likely that you are to treat somebody as a representation of a population that fits that stereotype and that is somehow difficult for you. And all of that is really, really bad, and the opposite of how we would like our businesses to be and the opposite of how we would like our society to be. So anytime you can slow your thinking down, anytime you can ask a couple of questions that push somebody away from whatever that stereotype is, the more likely you are to have a positive interaction with them, even if it's hard. You also, while that feels like a lot of upfront energy, it saves you a lot of time, energy, headache in the long run. And so it's that, like, how do you build a business that like meets your values and your goals? And how do you interact with your customers as like valuable humans, right? Like to be able to acknowledge their humanity and their decency, and they've come to you for a reason. Chances are you wanted them to show up for whatever that reason was, right? Like your business wants people coming in. That's the point, or at least part of the point. And so that positive interaction in that space is the thing that maintains your business in the future. And so really having each of these interactions be as positive as possible. And people will say, you know, well, I don't need that person as my customer. Well, no, you don't, but maybe you would actually really want them if you knew them slightly better, right? Maybe if you had the whole story, which you don't actually really have a right to, you would feel that connection and that desire to do things a little bit differently. And so to just have that openness and that curiosity is really key. And we've kind of started talking a little bit about safety planning. And so, and I'm noticing that it's about 12:30. And so if you have questions, now is the time I said I would start answering questions. So do start popping them in, and I'll talk a little bit about safety planning, but if you have any questions coming up, do put them in the chat, and we'll talk through a few scenarios and answer some questions. So the couple keys to safety planning: you have your COVID safety plan or you can't be open. And what you want to think about is your sort of customer interaction safety plans as well. So people are a little crispy, right? They're carrying a lot of stuff. They may or may not be sleeping, right? There's been a significant increase in substance abuse of all kinds. Well, substance use, maybe not necessarily abuse. People are trying to cope the best they can in a really hard situation. And some of that coping is really, really healthy, positive coping, and some of it is not. And they're walking into your establishment, into this interaction with you, with whatever kind of coping they've done for the day so far and whatever other interactions they've had, and they can have been incredibly hard and incredibly negative. If you try to have a conversation with me after 8 hours of Zoom, I make no sense and I'm highly reactive. It's where I'm at. If I am grocery shopping at night after 8 hours of Zoom, I make no sense, I can't answer questions properly, and I'm likely to overreact to there being no arugula. It's like that's where I'm at. And I have some skills and I can, calm myself down, but not everybody's in a place where they can do that right now. And so knowing what your safety plan is also allows whatever that frontline staff member is to know the boundaries of what they're expected to do and where to get help. And that will calm them down so that they are more likely to be able to come into that interaction from a space of being curious and empathetic. And that will dramatically increase the likelihood that things go well. And so what that means is, deciding, do you expect your frontline staff to enforce a mask mandate or not? You are not required as a business to enforce that people wear masks. You're required to have a plan. They're expected to wear masks, but there's this sort of gray space between enforcing them and expecting them. And so when somebody comes in, does your frontline staff, do they have to enforce that? And if you are a senior care facility, the answer is probably yes, they have to enforce it. If you have, a business where they'll be in for 2 minutes and then they'll be gone again, and it's more work to enforce it than to just serve them and have them go, then maybe you don't enforce it, right? So there is a little bit of wiggle room there about what enforcement looks like. You can ask them to wear a mask. You can tell them that masks are mandatory now. You can remind them to bring it next time, right? Whatever that piece looks like for your business. And each business is going to be different. If they are the only customer in your store and you have one employee and they're behind plexiglass, that enforcement looks very different than if it's like a large recreational facility and there's going to be a whole bunch of people. And so that's your kind of first thing is what are the expectations of this sort of first person that is interacting? How do they want to do that? Have you helped them say things to a few different people? Have you helped them think through who they're going to be talking to and what that ask is? Especially if they're younger, they may not have ever had to ask an older adult to do anything specific before. So for younger frontline retail staff, this may be the first time they have been expected to enforce rules with people that are older than themselves. And so that is a big ask, and they do need some support there. If it doesn't go well, what is their next option, right? Is there somebody that is supposed to be listening to come and help support them? Is there a manager that takes over that conversation, right? What is that second step? If it goes really badly, who dials 911, right? There should be a designated person to make that decision in your location. Who does that? Who decides? And at what point do you make that call? Depending on your service organization, depending on who you interact with, the level at which we're comfortable dealing with belligerent, escalated individuals is very, very different. And the rate at which we decide that we're calling the police can vary quite a lot. And so having clear expectations for everyone around what that looks like allows us to stay calm. If I know that this is getting heated and this is past that point that our organization calls 911, and I know that Arnold's going to be making that call, I can continue in this engagement without having to worry about that piece and likely not have it escalate more. And for interactions with police, where, I mean, this is something that a lot of us have been thinking about a lot, right? Are we comfortable calling police? What does that look like in our organization? A lot of people aren't comfortable making that call. If you're not, what is the bar for that? What are your other options? And for some organizations, we have other options. We have security on site, right? We have, you know, some guy that works in the warehouse that is huge and just looks like security. Him walking into the room de-escalates everything. Amazing, right? I mean, whatever that is for our organization, we want to be really clear so that the person having the conversation knows, right? Because that allows them to maintain that calm demeanor and to really feel like you've got them should this not go well. And it is amazing how just that little bit of feeling of safety, knowing that your organization has your back, allows you to engage in that conversation in a way that's much less escalating. I can see Arnold thinking.
Just right. You saw that thinking, huh? I didn't know I did the steam coming out of my ears. One of the things you said is there's a moment where the frontline worker is dealing with someone and then they transition to a supervisor or a big Joe in the warehouse. And it occurred to me that is such a delicate moment of transition. And I think that, you know, having some training for the staff on what to say in that moment, whether it's like, let me see if I can get my supervisor to help you, or let's see if I'm not sure how to proceed because I'm just new, or I'm just the clerk. And so let me get my manager to see how we can work this out. Is that kind of the approach that should be taken?
It really depends on the context again. And that's where that empathy piece actually matters, because you'll also pick up signals if you're really paying attention to somebody of what they're doing versus what you're doing. So they might trigger me and I might escalate. There's all kinds of reasons that could happen. I might be afraid of them, right? Like it might, you know, I'm not the biggest person in the world. When somebody stands over me and yells, it's scary, right? Like that is scary, right? So that space of like, and if I know that I have somebody coming, you know, I can set boundaries that are a lot safer feeling. I can say, you know, I'm going to step back here. I can't hear you, you know, while you're yelling, I can't hear you. What is it that you actually want today? I hear that you're frustrated, but if I know that like Joe's coming in the back, he can step to a place where he can just wait and make sure that I'm safe without necessarily stepping in, right? So it's a lot about like, what does your workplace look like? And what does that safety transition look like? And so it's, you know, like, I'm going to get my manager, we're going to help you, and we're going to do it outside. Right? And that can be okay. Like, I'm going to go get what I need. I will meet you outside in 1 minute.
You know, it also occurs to me, I mean, we've talked a lot about kind of that frontline worker, retail, customer interaction, but I guess, you know, we also talked about this is at work. And I'm imagining, you know, someone at work, and as you say, we have completely different approaches to safety. And they're sitting there wondering, well, I'm not comfortable with what's going on there. And you talk about that expectation for dealing with customers. And I think that's, you know, really important also to do for your staff. What is the expectation of enforcement with each other? What do I do if I'm feeling uncomfortable about someone? Because also you don't want to, you know, kind of tattle on your coworker, but at the same time, you want to, I mean, just that moment, you're right in that friction, which is the bigger issue. Do you have any, I guess, I mean, a lot of what you said already applies to that, but is there anything that you want to comment on that particular situation?
I mean, it's the same space, but they're people you know. And so there's some difference there, right? So to be able to say to somebody that is a coworker that is like, I need you to wear a mask because my family is high risk.
Mm.
I like, if you're going to come to my desk, I need you to wear a mask. Like, that's not about them. It's about you, right? You're setting your own boundaries. And often it is about us. Like, I need you to do this right now for me. For me, I need this. And it's a request about your own personal needs. And when we do that, right, it's not a judgment about them not wearing a mask. It's a reminder, because so often, especially at work or in these places we spend so much time, we have these normalized ways of doing things. And it is really easy to forget. Really easy to forget, right? So, you know, you work in a large office with a number of people that are still there because their work cannot be done from home. And it's a warehouse or it's another setting. And, you know, in your personal workspace, you don't have to have a mask maybe, but if you're going to the bathroom, you're expected to put yours on. Well, if you've just been doing a bunch of work and you've forgotten that, you know, we're in the 2020 hellscape or whatever you want to call it, right? Like, you know, that has slipped to the back of your mind because you've actually been having like a pretty decent moment of work. When you get up to go to the washroom, you might not remember that mask, right? You might not care that much. It might not be as front of mind for you because you're not in that high risk group, but you may just have forgotten. And so if you're attacked by your coworker for endangering them, which is exactly how they feel in that moment, right? Right? Like it's a tricky place. And then also to be able to own it when we react really badly with people is part of how we repair relationship, right? You know, that, you know, somebody came by my desk, they weren't wearing a mask. I freaked out because maybe I do, right? Because in that moment, I felt like they're trying to kill my parents, right?
Yeah, the amygdala
hijack. Right? Like, absolutely. I freaked out. So what is that moment of repair? What is that real apology? Right? What is that like? I am really sorry I reacted like that. Right? It wasn't helpful.
Now, I haven't seen any questions in the chat, so I think that you're just doing an excellent job of covering everything. Or, you know, like sometimes as you know, as we know, these are really sensitive conversations and they don't necessarily want to kind of dig into it. But there was one, I think a company was doing like a red, yellow, green scenario, like to have on people's desks to show, this person was either really like wanted to have strict protocols, this person was kind of in the medium area, and this person was in the green area. And it kind of talked about how, like what they're comfortable with. And so it was like an indicator for people could choose. Do you have any comment on that?
It's an interesting idea. It probably, it may or may not fit with the health protocol. And so for companies, we also have to think about, you know, the liability space, that space between what the orders are and what the recommendations are, or where we have unknown COVID liability. So it is often in places we have stricter rules, and then there's sort of unfollowing of rules, and there's questions about how you want to handle non-rule following, or how you want to build the rules, right? Whatever those happen to be for your organization, where there's sort of this minimum standard, and then there's where people are comfortable, and that kind of open dialogue around people's level of comfort. Like, if you have a coworker you really like, you work with a lot, and if you did one thing differently in your day, they would feel safe coming to work, and right now they don't, why wouldn't you do that? Right? Yeah. Like, why wouldn't you do that? And when it's framed that way, instead of like, you're a terrible person if you don't want to wear a mask, which is often where we're at, we assume all sorts of other political alignment, or even like other pieces around like how often people hand sanitize and how often people hand wash, and, you know, how clean your desk space is, and what kind of things you're allowed to bring in and out of the workplace, whatever those pieces are, that make one person feel safe and to somebody else feel over the top ridiculous, right? Do you wash your groceries when they come home?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, Amanda. I think that we're kind of coming towards the end here. Is there anything that you want to do to summarize, or anything else you want to cover before we kind of sign off?
Absolutely. So I will. I'm going to pop up this last slide, which is so people can see it. I actually have to hit the yes share screen button.
Well, you know, I feel very empathetic
right?
about your situation.
So here's just a couple of resources. The first one is enforcing mask wearing, which if Arnold sends anything out, I'm sure he'll link to. And it's by the City of New West. It is really, really well done. It runs you through the expectations, the options, some language at every point. It's great. If it's not good enough for your organization, if you need extra support, the Quarantine Conflict Resolution Service, which is currently run by Mediate BC, is a low fee sliding scale with some fee waivers available that does COVID-related conflict resolution. So whether that's within the workspace, around making safety plans that work for employees, in families, in housing, it's available. There's a link here. It's on the Mediate BC website. And then the other piece that I wanted to recommend for people is the Mediator's Handbook. It's by Jennifer Beer, and it's a really, really good kind of dive into some of the more specific skills. Things like, you know, how do you paraphrase what somebody's just said in a way that makes them feel heard? So some of those active listening skills, some of how you can use language to really support somebody else to calm down and to be heard and to hear them and to ensure that you're on the safe place, dealing with things like assumptions. And then there's my contact information. So if something, you know, has come up and you're thinking, you know, I want a little bit more support, you can find me at Mediate BC at amanda.seminoff@mediatebc.com. And those are 3 resources that I think are valuable to share. And yeah, and if any questions come up, because normally the moment everyone logs off, they think of 2 or 3 questions, I am available by email to answer questions.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I really appreciate everyone who is here. I think this is some great information. I know we actually had a lot of people registered, and I said that I would provide them with the recording. So I think that's why they didn't show up in person, but I think they're going to be very pleased with the great information that you covered. And thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. I think that's it. Have a happy holidays, Christmas season. Hopefully you can stay safe and find the joys in this very different holiday. And if this is your last chance to ask any questions before we lose Amanda, but otherwise, thank you for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. All right, so that's it. I'll see you now.
Thank you.
Bye now.